It is the summer of 1944, and the most powerful military alliance in human history is cracking down the middle. Not because of German guns, not because of bad weather or bad luck. Because of one British field marshal who refused to move fast enough, made a decision so stubborn and so costly that even his own boss, the supreme commander of Allied forces, started asking whether the whole arrangement was a mistake. That man was Bernard Law Montgomery, and the order he gave in the weeks after D-Day would become one of the most debated commands in the entire history of World War II. To understand what happened, you need to understand what Normandy was supposed to look like. The plan, called Operation Overlord, was built on a simple idea. The British and Canadian forces under Montgomery would attack Caen, a major city about 9 miles inland from the beaches, ideally on the first day of the invasion itself. Caen was the key. It sat at the top of a flat, open plain perfect for airfields and tank advances. Taking Caen fast would pull German armored divisions away from the American sector on the western end of the line, giving General Omar Bradley's men room to break out and sweep around the German flank. That was the plan. Caen on day 1. Maybe day 2 at the latest. Montgomery never took Caen on day 1. He never took it on day 2. He did not fully capture Caen until July 18, 1944. That is 6 weeks after D-Day. 6 weeks of fighting, dying, stalling, and watching German panzer divisions pile up directly in front of the British and Canadian lines, while the Americans struggled and bled trying to push through the dense hedgerow country to the west. And then came the order that made Eisenhower flinch. If you want to understand history the way it actually happened, with the names, the dates, the exact decisions that changed everything, stay right here because this story is only getting darker. The order in question came in the context of Operation Goodwood, launched on July 18, 1944. This was supposed to be the big British breakout. Montgomery massed 3 entire armored divisions, the 7th, the 11th, and the Guards Armored Division, nearly 1,000 tanks, in a corridor east of Caen for what the American and British High Command genuinely believed would be a massive push south toward Falaise. Eisenhower was excited. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder was excited. Everyone was excited. The Air Forces were asked to carpet bomb the German lines to open the way. They did. On the morning of July 18th, over 7,000 tons of bombs fell on German positions in front of the British armor. It was the heaviest air bombardment in support of ground forces in the entire history of the war up to that point. What happened next is what made Eisenhower question everything. The tanks moved forward. They gained ground. They destroyed German units that had been shattered by the bombing. And then, over the course of 3 days, the advance slowed, stalled, and stopped. By July 20th, the British and Canadian forces had advanced about 7 miles. 7 miles. At a cost of over 4,000 British and Canadian casualties, and more than 400 tanks destroyed or damaged. The open plain south of Caen, the very ground that had been the strategic objective for the entire campaign since before D-Day, remained in German hands. Montgomery then declared Goodwood a success. That word, success, is what broke something between Montgomery and the American commanders. To Montgomery, the battle had achieved its real purpose, which he later claimed was always just to tie down German armor and wear it down, not actually to break out. To Eisenhower, to Tedder, to Bradley, and to the American press, it looked like a catastrophic failure dressed up in diplomatic language. Eisenhower wrote Montgomery a letter on July 21st, 1944. The language was controlled, but the message was not. Eisenhower told Montgomery that the Allied forces could not afford to keep battering away without breakthrough. He said the lodgment area, meaning the ground the Allies held in Normandy, was still too small, that the situation was critical, and that bold and continuous offensive action was essential. He was not asking, he was telling. And for Eisenhower, a man who almost never put his frustration into writing to subordinates, this was the equivalent of a slap. But before all of this, before Goodwood, there was the order that set the entire chain of events in motion. An order that defined how Montgomery chose to run his whole campaign from the beaches to the German border. And it came from his own mouth, backed by his own philosophy, enforced by his own command culture. Montgomery's fundamental operational order to his ground forces, repeated in briefings and written directives throughout the Normandy campaign, was this: do not move until you are ready. Do not attack without being fully prepared. Never outrun your logistics. Never expose your flank. Build up before you strike. Wait for the right moment. On its face, this sounds reasonable. It sounds professional. It sounds like the kind of thing a general who cares about his soldiers would say. And that is exactly what made it so dangerous, because in the context of a race against time in Normandy, waiting for the right moment meant handing the Germans time they desperately needed to build a wall. The German commander in Normandy, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, understood something Montgomery did not seem to want to confront. Rommel knew Germany could not win a long battle of attrition in France. He wrote in his diary in June 1944 that the fate of the battle would be decided in the first few days, possibly the first few hours. Get inland fast, stretch the German line before it solidified, and the whole defensive structure collapses. Do the opposite, and Germany gets to do what it does best, which is construct an incredibly organized and lethal defensive wall and bleed you white trying to get through it. Montgomery chose the opposite. The city of Caen itself is a perfect example of this philosophy in action. The 2nd British Army, commanded by General Miles Dempsey under Montgomery, had every advantage in the first days after the landing. The German 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit near Caen on June 6th, was disorganized, operating without clear orders and numerically inferior. A fast British advance on June 6th or 7th could have taken the city and the surrounding terrain at relatively low cost. Instead, the British advance was halted and reorganized, prepared, made ready. By June 9th, German panzer units were arriving in strength. By June 12th, the 1st SS Panzer Corps was in position. By June 14th, German defenses around Caen were essentially impenetrable to anything short of a massive set-piece attack. What could have been taken for the price of a sharp skirmish now required weeks of artillery, bombing, and grinding infantry battles that killed thousands of men and flattened an ancient French city to rubble. The consequences of Montgomery's order to wait, to prepare, to consolidate, rippled all the way to the American sector. Because the Germans kept pouring their armor into the British and Canadian front, Bradley's Americans were fighting a different nightmare. They were fighting in the bocage, the hedgerow country of Normandy that turned every field into a fort. Tanks could not see more than 50 feet. Machine guns could cover any gap. The Germans had been farming and defending this terrain for years before the invasion. Every hedge became a pillbox. Every sunken lane became a killing ground. American soldiers, many of them in combat for the first time in their lives, were dying by the hundreds just to move from one field to the next. Eisenhower flew to Normandy in late June, and what he saw alarmed him. The lodgement area was still cramped. The breakout he had expected by this point had not materialized. Supply was becoming critical because without taking enough territory, the Allies could not build the roads, the depots, and the railheads needed to sustain a long campaign. The situation was not yet a crisis, but it was getting close. Eisenhower's frustration with Montgomery was not just military. It was personal, political, and institutional. Montgomery had a way of speaking and writing about the campaign that implied everything was going exactly according to his personal plan. His briefings were confident to the point of grandiosity. He told his commanders and the press that the battle was developing exactly as he had intended. He presented the slow grind around Caen not as a failure of the original plan, but as proof that his plan was working. He was fixing the Germans in place. He was drawing their armor north so Bradley could break out in the west. The problem with this argument is that it contradicts what Montgomery himself said and wrote before the campaign. His pre-invasion orders, his briefings to senior commanders, his communications to Churchill, all of them described an aggressive thrust inland, the rapid seizure of Caen, and a fast exploitation south toward Falaise. Nowhere in the pre-invasion planning does Montgomery say his intention is to fight a slow, attritional battle near the beaches. His own words from before June 6th condemn his later explanations. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, Eisenhower's deputy, went further than anyone else in the Allied hierarchy. Tedder privately, and then not so privately, told colleagues that Montgomery should be sacked. He brought the issue to Eisenhower directly on multiple occasions. He argued that Montgomery's caution was so extreme, his failures so persistent, and his unwillingness to accept criticism so dangerous that the campaign was being held hostage to one man's ego and operational conservatism. This was not a junior officer griping. This was the second highest ranking Allied officer in Europe. Eisenhower held back from sacking Montgomery for reasons that had nothing to do with battlefield performance. Montgomery was a hero in Britain. He had beaten Rommel at El Alamein in 1942, the first major British land victory of the entire war. Firing him would be a political crisis at the worst possible moment. Churchill would be furious. The British public would be shaken. The alliance itself could fracture along national lines at the moment it needed to hold together for the final drive into Germany. So Eisenhower did something harder than firing Montgomery. He watched him. He pushed back. He sent letters. He held meetings. He brought in other commanders to provide pressure from multiple directions. He kept the alliance intact while trying to force Montgomery to move faster than his instincts wanted to allow. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25, 1944 by American forces, finally broke the deadlock. General Bradley's plan was direct and brutal. Massive air bombardment along a narrow strip of front, then a concentrated ground assault to punch through the German line and pour armor into the gap. The bombing killed American soldiers on July 24th and 25th through tragic short drops, including General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the entire war in Europe. But the breakthrough happened. By the end of July, General George Patton's Third Army was through the gap and running free into Brittany and then east toward Paris. Montgomery's men contributed to the success of Cobra by pinning German forces in the east. That part of his argument does hold up. The Germans could not redeploy enough armor to stop Cobra because they were still locked in brutal fighting around Caen. But this does not erase the question that every serious military historian since 1944 has been asking. Could the same result have been achieved 6 weeks earlier, with a faster, more aggressive British advance that took Caen before the Germans could fortify it? The answer for most of them is yes. The cost of the delay is not abstract. Between D-Day on June 6th and the breakout at the end of July, the Allies suffered approximately 122,000 casualties in Normandy. The German army lost heavily too, roughly 114,000 men. But the Allies came into France with an objective, which was to win the war quickly, and every week of delay was a week of dying that might have been avoided with a faster campaign. Montgomery's defenders have a real point when they say he was fighting a fundamentally different kind of German defensive strength than the pre-invasion planners expected. The hedgerow country was worse than anticipated. The German resistance was fiercer. The Panzer-Lehr Division, the 12th SS Panzer Division, the 2nd Panzer Division, these were elite formations with experienced commanders, and they did not break easily. Any Allied commander in that situation was going to face hard fighting. But the specific critique of Montgomery is not that he faced a difficult enemy. It is that his own command philosophy, his insistence on preparation and consolidation over speed and initiative, caused him to repeatedly miss windows of opportunity that existed and then closed. The fall of Caen on July 18th was not blocked by German strength alone. It was delayed by British hesitation, by multiple attack plans that were prepared and then delayed, by Montgomery's own reluctance to commit until the conditions were perfect, in a campaign where perfect conditions were never going to exist. General Francis de Guingamp, Montgomery's own chief of staff, wrote in his memoirs that on several occasions in Normandy, he watched opportunities slip away because of delays in getting orders issued and attacks launched. De Guingamp was loyal to Montgomery. He was not trying to condemn him, but even the man who served directly under him saw the pattern. Eisenhower finally moved in September 1944 when he took direct command of ground forces away from Montgomery and assumed it himself. Montgomery had been the overall ground commander for all Allied forces in France since D-Day. From September 1st, 1944, he became only the commander of 21st Army Group, the British and Canadian forces, while Eisenhower commanded the whole show. Montgomery was simultaneously promoted to Field Marshal, the highest rank in the British Army, which softened the blow publicly but changed nothing about who held real power. Montgomery fought this change bitterly. He argued that Eisenhower's broad front strategy, advancing on Germany along the entire line from the North Sea to Switzerland, was wrong. He wanted a single concentrated thrust in the north under his command, through Holland and across the Rhine into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. He believed this could end the war by Christmas 1944. He presented this argument repeatedly and with characteristic immodesty to Eisenhower, to Churchill, to anyone who would listen. Eisenhower refused, partly for military reasons, partly because giving Montgomery a single concentrated thrust essentially meant giving Montgomery command over American armies again. And after Normandy, Eisenhower did not believe the campaign could survive another extended period of Montgomery's operational pace. And then came Market Garden. September 17th, 1944, Montgomery's own plan, his shot at proving he had been right all along. Airborne troops dropped across 3 major river crossings in Holland, with ground armor racing north to link up with them and punch a corridor into Germany. The British 1st Airborne Division dropped at Arnhem, the farthest bridge, and waited for the armor to arrive. The armor was delayed. By bad roads, by stronger German resistance than intelligence had predicted, by planning failures, and yes, by the pace of the advance. The British paratroopers at Arnhem held the north end of the bridge for 4 days with no air support, dwindling ammunition, and no relief column. Of the approximately 10,000 men who dropped at Arnhem, about 1,400 made it back across the Allied lines. The rest were dead, wounded, or captured. Market Garden was Montgomery's plan, his timeline, his intelligence assessments that were dangerously optimistic, his insistence on launching before conditions were fully favorable. It was, in a brutal irony, the exact kind of aggressive, rushed operation his critics had been demanding from him all summer in Normandy, and it ended in catastrophe. Eisenhower never publicly condemned Montgomery during the war. The alliance required restraint, but in his private papers, in letters to his wife Mamie, and in conversations with close aides, the frustration was permanent. He wrote that Montgomery was the most difficult man he had ever had to manage. He wrote that Montgomery never understood what it meant to command an alliance, only what it meant to command the British. Eisenhower, reading Montgomery's memoirs, was so furious that he broke his post-war silence and began drafting a full rebuttal. Eisenhower's papers from this period show a man methodically going through Montgomery's claims and marking them as false, exaggerated, or self-serving. He never published the rebuttal in full, but he shared it with historians, and it became part of the historical record. The man Montgomery accused of not understanding ground warfare had commanded the largest military coalition in human history to total victory. The man who claimed his own campaign was perfectly executed had spent 6 weeks failing to take a city 9 miles from the beach, lost 10,000 men at a single bridge in Holland, and ended the war without the single knockout thrust he had promised could end everything by Christmas. The brutal order Montgomery gave, wait, prepare, consolidate, never expose yourself before the moment is right, did not just slow down the Normandy campaign. It calcified into a command philosophy that followed him from Caen to Arnhem and never changed. He was the same general in September 1944 that he had been in June. The only difference is that by then, Eisenhower had stopped giving him armies large enough to make the mistake matter. The Arnhem operation used mostly British and Polish troops. Montgomery had already lost his authority over the American armies he had commanded in Normandy. Eisenhower had quietly made sure of that. The man who questioned his decision had already begun correcting it. He just did it in a way that kept the alliance alive long enough to win the war. The final battle casualty count for Market Garden was approximately 17,000 Allied soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. Montgomery called it 90% successful.